Hi everyone, Harris here with iDownload Blog. Logitech has consistently made a really solid keyboard case for the iPad and at a cheaper price point than Apple's, with a couple bonus benefits. And this year is absolutely no exception to this trend, with a slimmer and redesigned case as well. Let's go ahead and check it out. So consistent with the past years, this is a two-piece case, which means you aren't glued to the keyboard if you don't want it. You can easily attach or remove the keyboard at any point, and if the keyboard is attached, you can also flip it under the case for using it on the desk, or behind the iPad, which will automatically disable the keys and trackpad. Now, I have had a couple instances where even flipped around, I was getting a little bit of input from the back, but that wasn't the rule, and that was kind of the exception. But of course, you can always remove the keyboard entirely and just use the case with all its stand options. Whether you're using it with the Apple Pencil or reading or watching, the stand is sturdy and flexible, and it's just a really well-built case. Now, the one downside to this design of case is that the further you extend the stand, the more desk space you need. Whereas a standard hinge on a laptop or even something like Apple's Magic Keyboard for the iPad only requires approximately the size of the physical keyboard on the desk, whereas this case requires the desk space of the keyboard plus the stand. This undoubtedly can be annoying, as it does just take up more space on a desk, on a lap, which can be annoying when you are running out of leg space, but something you'll kind of just learn to live with, and is the direct con of the Pro of having this stand without the keyboard attached, which I think is worth it ultimately. And when you're flying on an airplane and using the table tray, this is going to extend over the tray, which can be a little bit annoying, but if you flip the keyboard around and just use the iPad, it will fit. And this year, Logitech actually totally redesigned the material of the case, and it looks sleek. The back of the keyboard is aluminum and rubber, while the rest of the case is plastic and rubber, and it looks good and feels even better. It looks like something between a Microsoft Surface and a black MacBook. It's really clean. The downside is that it instantly gets covered in fingerprints and oils, and basically anything that touches it is going to show itself. Now, because it's black, it does have to somewhat reflect light in order to show these off, but in any circumstance where you're reflecting light, they're going to show up. I honestly would have preferred the fabric cover that they used in past years' cases, because you wouldn't get any fingerprints, any oil, really any grime on it whatsoever. But if they made this switch for the sake of thinness and lightness, which I think they might have, then I think it's a worthy trade-off. And it looks really good and kind of matches the sleekness of the new M4 iPad Pro. Okay, and the keyboard. Like past years, it's really solid. It sounds nice. It feels nice and it looks nice, and I can type plenty fast on it. As per Logitech's tradition, it includes backlighting and a function row. Now this year they changed the power button to a do not disturb button, which I don't really like. I found myself often using the power button to click and walk away from my desk, something I would do pretty often. And I don't really ever find myself clicking do not disturb while I'm using the iPad. So for my usage anyway, I definitely would have preferred them sticking with the power button rather than the do not disturb button. Additionally, I wish they would follow Apple in making the home button an escape button, because it's really easy to do Command H to go home when you're using the keyboard, or a simple swipe up at the bottom of the iPad to do it via the gesture. So I really wish that was escape, because there's so many pop-ups now when you're browsing the web and different menu boxes and watching videos, stuff like that. There's a ton of circumstances where I really wish I had an escape button, but instead there's a home button, which there's two other ways of already doing that, one from software, one from the keyboard. So I hope they can switch that in the future. Now the trackpad got bigger, especially if you get the 12.9-inch case version. It is huge on that keyboard, and it's smooth, it's consistent, and it works well. Now you'll probably want to go into the trackpad settings of your iPad and customize the settings. I like turning on one tap click, as well as turning up the speed a little bit to make it a little bit more responsive. All in all, it's really good. You can click anywhere on the keyboard and it just works. It's not quite as magical and glassy and consistent as Apple's, but again, cheaper price tag with the other benefits. So, you know, maybe they can catch up to Apple's quality, but for the time being, it's a really solid option. Now, I have noticed that when I'm not typing on a flat surface, so if I'm maybe sitting in bed or under a tree, or when I was riding a bus for a few hours the other week, and I had this and it's an uneven surface, sometimes you'll put a little bit of pressure on one side of the trackpad or the other from underneath, from your legs or whatever surface the keyboard is on. And when it's not flat, I did find that the click was not as consistent and reliable, because when you're putting pressure on one side of the keyboard, it responds negatively on the top of the trackpad. So that's one thing that I hope that they can kind of work out, and I think it's actually the direct result of this slightly thinner trackpad versus last year's, which was a little bit thicker but didn't really have any of these issues with pressure underneath. So this works really well when it's on a flat surface, but when it's not on a flat surface, it just doesn't work as well. But in general, for lap writing, for desk writing, for whatever, it does work. You might just kind of have to compensate a little bit if you're writing or typing or using the trackpad in kind of an awkward angle or not totally flat position. One downside with this design is that the USB-C port cannot be used with certain hubs that attach directly to the iPad. So I know Anchor and some other brands have those. Can't use this at all unless you use an extender. And some kind of oversized USB-C ports will not fit in this port. Now, most will, Apple's will. If you use a Thunderbolt cable, that will fit. But some oversized ones won't fit, and some kind of bigger ones will have to squeeze pretty tight to fit. I had one cable not fit, and I totally forget which one it was, but I did have one instance where a cable wouldn't fit with this. So I hope in future years they just make that a little bit bigger if they can. Now, one other thing to note about the design is that it does leave the Apple Pencil slot available to connect it, so there's no issues, but if you're walking around a lot, it's definitely going to fall off at some point. I actually did have this fall off when I was walking with it, and I did damage the tip of the pencil. So that's definitely a bit of a downside. There's no type of strap or anything like that, but that's pretty standard for these type of cases. So at the end of the day, Logitech has made another really fantastic keyboard for the iPad. It's versatile, it's better priced than Apple's, and it just has some really good features. The only thing I would hope for in the future would be a reinforced trackpad, just to kind of avoid some of those issues where the keyboard is lopsided and there's a little bit of pressure coming from one side. A bigger USB-C cutout if possible, and switching the home and do not disturb buttons for escape and power or lock buttons. But it's a thinner, sleeker case than ever, and a really good option for your iPad. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.